A king fell before everyone's eyes, but not in a battlefield of armies nor in a clash of business empires. He fell by his own arrogance. Edward Blake, the untouchable millionaire of Las Vegas, believed he could humiliate anyone without consequence. What he didn't know was that when he spat in the face of Olivia Reed, he was signing the beginning of the end of his empire, and here is where the turning point begins. The invisible victim transforms into the very piece that dismantles an entire kingdom of power and corruption. But before we go further, I want to know from you, where are you watching this story from? Comment your city and country down below. And of course, subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell, because the next chapters promise even more secrets, conspiracies, and twists. Edward Blake was the kind of man who could walk into any room and, by the silence that followed, make it clear how much power he held. Owner of casinos and hotels in Las Vegas, he didn't need to raise his voice to be feared. His presence was like a looming storm, inevitable, strong, and unsettling. The problem was that along with his authority came an arrogance that suffocated. And that day, this arrogance would reach its peak. Olivia Reed, on the other hand, was a woman in a maid's uniform, but she carried a dignity too great for hurried eyes to notice. She worked tirelessly to support her sick mother, never allowing the weight of life to break her spirit. Her posture said more than words, firm, resilient, able to withstand storms. But to Edward's eyes, she was nothing more than invisible. Invisible. Until he chose her as his target. It happened in a flash. The lobby was crowded with employees and guests when Edward, consumed by fury, advanced on Olivia. The gesture was cruel. Without hesitation, he spat in her face before everyone. The saliva slid down like an invisible scar, an act of violence louder than any shout. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating, as if even the walls had borne witness. The humiliation cut through Olivia like a cold blade. It wasn't just the act itself, but what it represented, the attempt to crush her dignity, to reduce her worth to nothing. Her marked face now carried a stain no one would forget, as if Edward wanted to paint in front of everyone the portrait of an inhuman hierarchy. But in some situations, life is quick to respond. The looks around revealed fear, discomfort, and helplessness. Employees who had suffered Edward's cruelty before didn't dare intervene. Olivia, for a moment, thought she might collapse, but inside her, a quiet flame began to rise, the kind of strength born when dignity is wounded beyond repair. It was an instant that would change the course of everything, though she didn't know it yet. And then the unexpected happened. Edward, still holding that superior gaze, felt his body fail him. His knees buckled, his breath faltered, and he collapsed before everyone. The man who seemed untouchable now lay vulnerable on the floor. The scene unfolded so quickly that no one had time to react. The silence turned into collective shock. Some rushed to help him, others stepped back, unsure of what to do. Olivia stood still, her heart racing, trying to grasp if it was real. The contrast between the violence of the humiliation and the weakness of the millionaire was so sharp it seemed staged. But it was real, raw, and final. The marble king had just revealed his feet of clay. In that space, no one knew exactly what to feel. Pity? Fear? Just plain astonishment? What everyone knew was that Edward's fall marked a turning point. There was no going back without carrying the memory of that instant. It was as if life itself had written, in bold letters, that power is not eternal, and every empire can collapse in a heartbeat. Olivia, still with her face wet from the insult, had no idea how much this moment would become a dividing line in her life. It wasn't just Edward's physical collapse, but the foreshadowing of a mystery that would drag Las Vegas into intrigue and secrets. In that lobby, in front of countless witnesses, a story of pain, resilience, and revelation was born. And unknowingly, Olivia was already at its very center. Edward Blake's body lay sprawled across the cold marble floor, while the atmosphere shifted between panic and shock. Employees tried to remain calm, but guests whispered frantically, creating a wave of tension that echoed through the gilded walls of the lobby. Doctors were summoned in haste, and what seemed like a simple fainting spell was already turning into something far greater. When the paramedics arrived, silence broke into frenzy. They placed oxygen masks, checked his pulse, applied stimulants, yet nothing seemed to bring Edward back to consciousness. The man who once commanded an empire with a single glance was now vulnerable, surrendered to the uncertainty of an inexplicable condition. And as always, where there is mystery, there are rumors. In no time, the word poisoning spread through the corridors. No one knew where the suspicion came from, but everyone repeated it as truth. Every gaze turned toward Olivia, still standing there with her face marked by recent humiliation. The contrast was striking. Minutes earlier, she had been the victim of her employer's fury. Now she was the possible culprit for his downfall. Terrified, Olivia swore her innocence, but the weight of those stares burned her skin more than the spit she had endured. It was as if she stood in an invisible courtroom, where every person was both judge and executioner. Her fragile social position made it easy to believe she was guilty, and deep down everyone knew it. In that moment, truth mattered less than appearances. While doctors struggled to stabilize Edward, some employees whispered among themselves. "She always looked at him strangely," muttered one. "Wouldn't be a surprise if she did something," said another. These quiet remarks were like invisible daggers piercing Olivia from all directions. What was crueler still was that no one stopped to consider how many enemies Edward himself had made over the years. The police soon arrived, intensifying the tension. Rapid questions, suspicious glances, notebooks filling with rushed descriptions. Olivia was pulled aside, forced to repeat that she had done nothing. Yet the mere presence of an officer by her side began to craft a narrative that placed her under suspicion. Doubt more than proof is what destroys reputations. Meanwhile, rumors seeped beyond the hotel walls. Newspapers, blogs, and gossip sites rushed to craft sensational headlines. Las Vegas tycoon collapses mysteriously in hotel lobby. Maid tied to luxury hotel scandal. Words traveled faster than truth, and Olivia realized she was caught in a web far larger than she had ever imagined. With each passing minute, Edward's fragility contrasted with the strengthening of intrigue. It was impossible to ignore that this powerful, ruthless man had enemies everywhere. Politicians, businessmen, mobsters, even members of his own family. The pieces were shifting like an invisible chessboard, and Olivia, unwillingly, had become an essential part of the game. The lobby had turned into the stage of a mystery drama. At its center, an unconscious millionaire. Around him, a humble maid judged in silence. And above all, a cloud of uncertainty hanging over every witness. What had happened to Edward Blake? This unanswered question now left room for old secrets to rise to the surface. While Edward remained in a coma, old stories began to resurface like ghosts no one wanted to recall. Behind the scenes of Las Vegas, forgotten names from the 1990s were once again whispered in bars and dark corridors, and among those who knew the underworld well. It was as if the millionaire's sudden downfall had opened a chest of secrets long buried. Flashbacks of his trajectory revealed meetings in underground casinos, where the smoke of cigars mixed with the clinking of illegal chips. Edward was not just a talented businessman, but also a reckless gambler, willing to strike deals with men who lived outside the law. Mobsters, loan sharks, and corrupt politicians were all part of his network. That past, once buried, was now clawing its way back to the surface. The memories showed meetings in windowless rooms, filled with expensive whiskey, and promises of loyalty that would never be kept. A younger, ambitious Edward signed contracts that guaranteed quick fortune, but left trails of destruction in his wake. Each signature was a double-edged blade, bringing him closer to wealth while creating powerful enemies at the same time. Meanwhile, Olivia discovered that her own community had been ruined by these very decisions. The neighborhood where she had grown up, once full of hard-working families, had been slowly swallowed by debts and silent foreclosures. Many lost their homes while others fell into poverty. For her, every childhood memory now carried the invisible mark of Edward Blake's hand. The audience following the story began to realize none of this was coincidence. Edward's arrogance was not merely a product of the present, but the continuation of a history of cruelty and greed. He didn't just have business rivals. He had collected victims of all kinds, destroyed families, betrayed partners, and even allies who had once been discarded. Rumors of unsolved murders and mysterious disappearances began to circulate once more. Those who dared to oppose Edward's empire simply vanished, leaving behind only silence and fear. Voices that had once been muted now felt emboldened to share their stories, as though the tycoon's fall had created space for truth to finally emerge. Olivia, though she didn't fully understand the scope, began to connect the dots. She discovered that her father, who had died under strange circumstances, might have been one of those silent victims. That detail seeped into her mind like an old wound reopened, making her connection to Edward even more personal and painful. The enemy who humiliated her might also have been the one who destroyed her family. Las Vegas, a city of lights and secrets, seemed to thrum with the unveiling of these stories. Hotels, casinos, and neon-lit streets all hid deep scars, each somehow tied to Edward Blake. The empire he had built was founded on blood and corruption, and now it began to collapse like a house of cards. Every testimony, every memory added a new piece to the puzzle. At the heart of this unfolding, Olivia was no longer just a bystander to her own pain. She was now part of a larger narrative where victims emerged and hidden truths surfaced. What seemed like a simple act of humiliation in the hotel lobby had become something much deeper. The unearthing of decades of secrets that could no longer be ignored. Edward's temporary disappearance and the rumors of poisoning drew the attention of powerful people. It didn't take long before an investigator was brought in to lead the case. His name was Michael Collins, a man known not only for his experience but also for his blunt, no-nonsense way of dealing with the truth. His arrival shifted the direction of the investigation. Michael was not the glamorous detective of movies. He had a sharp gaze, always catching the detail others overlooked, and a firm posture that intimidated effortlessly. Dressed in dark clothes with a close beard and a somber presence, he carried the aura of someone scarred by failures of the past. Yet his determination to solve what lay before him was unshakable. From the very first moment, Olivia was under his lens. Michael observed every gesture, every word, as if trying to decipher the truth hidden behind her expressive eyes. The initial suspicion was inevitable. She had been in the wrong place at the wrong time, with motives that could easily be twisted into something personal. To him, nothing could be ruled out, but something about Olivia didn't fit the image of a guilty woman. The quiet strength, the way she held on to her dignity even after being humiliated, stirred an uncomfortable doubt in him. It was as if she carried within her a key, not to condemnation but to the understanding of what was really unfolding. As days passed, Michael realized Olivia was sharper than she appeared. Her answers didn't come only from the instinct of denying a crime, but from someone who knew how to read people and situations. It was as though life itself had trained her to see beyond appearances. That left him intrigued, though he never admitted it aloud. While the official police clung to superficial leads, Michael preferred to walk through the in-between lines. He visited places, reviewed old files, listened to stories from employees too afraid to speak in public. Slowly, Edward's web of enemies became more visible, and the deeper he went, the clearer it became that Olivia was central to the puzzle. The contrast between the two grew sharper. On one side, the hardened detective, used to doubting everyone. On the other, the resilient Maid, used to being underestimated. Their encounter created a unique tension. It wasn't an alliance yet, but it wasn't mere suspicion either. It was a thin thread of connection destiny had begun to weave. Michael knew that in stories like these, truth rarely appeared where everyone was pointing. He had seen innocence condemned and the guilty vanish like smoke. Perhaps that was why he observed Olivia so carefully. It was as if he sensed she carried a greater role, even if she didn't know it herself. In the end, both were bound by Edward Blake's shadow. Michael in search of answers, Olivia in search of survival and dignity. Neither knew it yet, but this encounter would become the turning point. Because in the darkness of mystery, sometimes the most unlikely figure is the one who lights the first spark of revelation. Olivia began to notice details that once seemed insignificant. Hallways where employees rarely passed, doors always locked, elevators that stopped at floors not listed on the usual panel. The hotel's routine, once automatic and invisible to her, now revealed small cracks of mystery. It was as if there were a hidden side of the place guarded under lock and key. On a silent night after finishing her tasks, Olivia noticed something strange. An employee slipped discreetly into a restricted corridor and disappeared behind a door concealed by a wooden panel. Curiosity got the better of her, and she decided to follow the trail. Her heart raced with each step, aware that she was crossing a dangerous line. The narrow corridor led to an old elevator, with buttons different from the usual ones. Olivia hesitated but pressed what appeared to be a non-existent floor. The doors closed, and the silence was broken only by the grinding of gears carrying her deeper than any ordinary employee could imagine. The sensation was of plunging into forbidden territory. When the doors opened, Olivia found a space unlike anything she had seen in the luxury hotel. The hidden floor was a shadowy environment, filled with secret meeting rooms, illegal gambling tables, and documents piled in iron cabinets. The air reeked of stale smoke and expensive liquor, evidence that the place was often used. On the walls, discreet frames hid embedded safes. On wooden desks, stacks of contracts and folders sealed confidential lay scattered. With trembling hands, Olivia flipped through some papers and uncovered names of politicians, businessmen, and even public figures. With every page, it became clearer that Edward used this space for dealings that could never see daylight. At the center of the main room stood a massive safe. Its metallic structure reflected the dim glow of a hanging lamp, as though it guarded something of immeasurable value. Olivia didn't know what lay inside, but the safe's mere presence made her breath heavy. It was the kind of secret capable of destroying entire reputations. As she explored, Olivia heard voices approaching. Edward's trusted men laughed and talked as they entered through the same hidden door. Quickly, she hid behind a heavy curtain, watching them from a distance. She saw them open a folder filled with millions in figures and compromising photos, confirming that this floor was the beating heart of Edward's shady empire. With each second, Olivia realized she was facing something much greater than a simple mystery about a sudden collapse. Here, on this secret floor, were the proofs of an empire built on corruption, blackmail, and crime. It was as if she had stumbled upon Edward's forbidden diary, written in numbers and secrets. The danger, however, was just as real as the discovery. Hidden, her heart racing, Olivia knew she could not stay there for long. Yet one certainty began to form inside her. She had found the end of a thread that, if pulled, could unravel Edward Blake's entire web of power. While Edward remained in a coma, the eyes of the public and the media turned to his family. The Blake mansion, once a symbol of luxury and power, became the stage for intrigue and hidden disputes. Each member carried a mask of elegance, but behind it were deep cracks ready to burst open. Catherine Blake, the wife, assumed a cold and calculating posture. A woman of impeccable appearance, blonde, slim, elegant, she knew exactly how to behave before the cameras. Her soft voice concealed a sharp, ambitious mind that saw in her husband's downfall an opportunity to finally take control. Her gaze did not reveal grief but expectation. Andrew, the son, was the opposite. At 27, with an athletic body already worn by nights of parties and addiction, his eyes were bloodshot and his hands restless. The arrogance he inherited from his father, mixed with the recklessness of someone who gambled the family's fortune away on drugs and betting. To him, Edward's collapse was no tragedy, but perhaps a chance to escape dangerous debts. Samantha, the youngest daughter, seemed to be the fragile link in that corrupted chain. Only 24 years old, with delicate beauty and an introspective stare, she remained quiet, though inside her grew a silent resentment toward her controlling father. Unlike her mother and brother, she saw no advantage in Edward's fall, but she carried wounds that kept her distant from compassion. At the dinner table, the atmosphere was that of a Cold War. Catherine spoke about business and contacts as if already planning her next moves. Andrew burst out with impulsive comments, demanding money and suggesting shady deals. Samantha remained silent, her green eyes fixed on her plate, but every gesture betrayed a mind that never forgot emotional scars. The family, once displayed to the public as an example of success, now revealed its true nature. A battlefield disguised in expensive suits and refined dresses. There was no affection, only interests. The Blake Empire seemed not only to be crumbling on the outside but rotting from within, corroded by its very roots. Newspapers exploited every detail. Headlines displayed photos of Catherine in suspicious meetings, rumors about Andrew's debts to mobsters, and speculation that Samantha might be the only one willing to betray her own mother. It was as if the media had found in the family's disgrace the perfect spectacle. Each scandal only reinforced how poisonous that bloodline was. Olivia, still on the sidelines, watched from afar. She realized the mystery wasn't limited to Edward's collapse, but extended to the family's internal rot. It was like watching a serpent devour itself. With each revelation, it became clearer that the Blake's secrets went far deeper than she had imagined. Inside the mansion, between tense dinners and distrustful glances, the atmosphere was thick with conspiracy. Catherine plotted in silence. Andrew drowned in despair, and Samantha began to harbor secrets that could turn into weapons. The family was not only divided, but on the verge of destroying itself from within, and Edward's collapse was only the beginning of this poisoned bloodline. After days of silence and uncertainty, Edward Blake finally opened his eyes. The hospital room was bathed in shadows, lit only by machines monitoring his breathing and heartbeat. The man who once commanded empires now looked fragile, bound by tubes and wires, as if every detail reminded him that his power was no longer absolute. The doctors remained cautious. They said his body had resisted, but his mind still carried signs of delirium and paranoia. Edward refused to accept his condition, tried to tear out the wires, shouted orders at nurses as if he were still running a casino. But his words sounded weak, almost pitiful, echoing in a space where no one feared him anymore. Olivia, called back to resume her duties at the hotel, never imagined she would face him so soon. The encounter happened when Edward, during a supervised visit, was wheeled into the lobby. Even weakened, his eyes still burned with arrogance. Upon seeing her, he wasted no time in repeating his cruelty, insulting her in front of everyone, as if needing to prove he still had control. The scene, however, no longer carried the same weight. Olivia felt the sting of the words, but something within her had shifted. The humiliation no longer crushed her as before. It was as if her past pain had turned into armor. She did not cry, nor did she avert her eyes. She simply met his gaze in silence, and that silence, more than any answer, shook Edward. As Edward raged, the audience around them no longer reacted as they once had. Many employees exchanged looks of disapproval. Guests whispered among themselves. The millionaire, once respected and feared, was becoming an object of shame. The contrast between his physical weakness and his arrogance turned him into a nearly tragic figure, a shadow of what he had been. Olivia, meanwhile, experienced an inner awakening. With every insult, she felt more conviction that she no longer had to fear this man. He was trapped in his own decline, while she was slowly breaking free. The dignity once crushed now rose like a shield, transforming her into someone far stronger than before. Edward's awakening was not only physical, but psychological. He grew paranoid, accusing allies, distrusting family, imagining conspiracies in every corner. The walls of the empire he had built seemed to close in on him, and the only way he knew to respond was by lashing out at the most vulnerable. It was the beginning of his mental downfall. Olivia understood without speaking aloud that the balance of power was shifting. With every glare of contempt from Edward, she felt less fear and more determination. The man who once seemed untouchable now stood before her, broken and vulnerable, and it was precisely this image that planted the certainty in her heart that the game could turn. In that lobby, before silent witnesses, an invisible transformation was unfolding. Edward awakened to his own fragility, while Olivia awakened to her true strength. The king's fall was not yet complete, but there was no longer any doubt. The board was changing, and the next move might be hers. Michael Collins' investigation was beginning to dig into places the police dared not touch. Among old papers and forgotten testimonies, he uncovered a disturbing thread of truth. Olivia's father had died under circumstances directly tied to Edward Blake's business dealings. That revelation changed everything. The case was no longer just professional. It had gained a new and deeply personal weight. Olivia received the truth like a blow to the chest. For years, she had believed her father's death to be an accident, a cruel twist of fate. Now the pieces aligned. Edward, the same man who humiliated her, had also stolen from her the chance to grow up with her father. The pain transformed into a silent rage, a flame that burned without consuming her dignity. Michael noticed the change in Olivia. Her gaze no longer carried only suffering but determination as well. It was as if, by learning the truth, she had found a personal reason to confront her enemy. The detective, who once saw her as a suspect, now began to see her as a potential ally. And that shift in perception was decisive. Their closeness developed discreetly, through quick meetings in the hotel's hidden corners. Michael spoke little, but each word carried weight and pragmatism. Olivia, in turn, provided details only an insider could know. Schedules, secret accesses, the names of suspicious employees. Together, they became an unlikely but formidable pair. For Olivia, trusting someone like Michael felt strange. Life had already taught her that trust was a dangerous luxury, yet she recognized in him the same fire of defiance that had begun to burn inside her. Perhaps for the first time, she wasn't alone in her fight. That realization gave her strength. Michael, too, saw himself reflected in Olivia. In the past, he had lost people he cared about because he hadn't acted in time. Now, standing beside this woman carrying both pain and dignity, he felt a chance at redemption. The partnership wasn't only strategic, it was also deeply personal. A chance to repair old failures. Their late-night conversations grew more intense. The hotel, with its long corridors and ever-watchful security cameras, seemed to observe their every move, yet the two found ways to communicate without arousing suspicion. Trust was growing, though wrapped in silent tension, as both knew they were stepping into dangerous territory. With every step, Edward's web became more exposed. Michael gathered evidence. Olivia collected intelligence. What began as a fragmented investigation was now becoming a joint strategy. It was like assembling a dark puzzle, each piece revealing more of the rot within Blake's empire. And with every revelation, the danger around them deepened. At heart, Olivia was no longer just the humiliated maid. She was becoming a woman seeking justice, driven by the pain of her past and the chance to rewrite her future. And beside her, Michael found a renewed purpose. Their destinies were now intertwined, and the secret alliance they had forged was only the beginning of a silent war against Edward Blake. Inside the Blake mansion, the atmosphere grew increasingly suffocating. Edward's absence as the central figure left space for each family member to reveal their true face. Between silent dinners and tense meetings, the walls echoed with secrets and conspiracies. The house itself seemed to have become a snake pit, ready to devour its own. Catherine Blake, elegant and calculating, no longer hid her ambition. She received investors discreetly in late-night meetings, presenting herself as the rightful heir to the empire. Her cold gaze and impeccable posture radiated confidence, but behind it dripped poison. She planned to seize her husband's business not out of revenge, but for the absolute power she had always craved. Andrew, on the other hand, sank deeper into dangerous deals. Desperate to pay off debts, he reached out to local criminals, offering information and even attempting to sell off pieces of the family fortune. The young man, once merely rebellious, was now a real threat, a loose thread that could unravel the Blakes' downfall even faster. Samantha, quiet and observant, grew closer to Olivia. Unlike her mother and brother, she wasn't after power. She wanted vengeance against her father. Her apparent fragility concealed a sharp mind. In discreet encounters, she confided family secrets to Olivia, as if longing to watch her father's empire collapse before her very eyes. Each day, the mansion's corridors pulsed with new schemes. Staff loyal to Catherine monitored every move, while Andrew's allies arrived and departed in luxury cars under the cover of night. Samantha moved like a shadow, absorbing information that could prove fatal if revealed at the right moment. The very air seemed thick with conspiracy. Olivia, now embedded in the heart of this venomous labyrinth, realized she was facing more than one enemy. It was like walking across a minefield where any step could trigger an explosion. The Blake family wasn't just divided. They were a battlefield, each member clawing for power even if it meant destroying one another. Michael, watchful as ever, saw how the pieces moved across the board. He observed Catherine forging alliances, Andrew sinking into the underworld, and Samantha aligning with Olivia. The detective knew that in a war of serpents, one wrong move could be fatal. Yet he also understood that within this chaos lay the evidence he desperately sought. Edward's empire was unraveling, not only because of external enemies, but from the venom within his own bloodline. The masks had fallen, exposing the wounds hidden behind a facade of luxury. The mansion, once a symbol of power, now served as a stage for betrayal and unrestrained ambition. In the shadows of the night, with each character moving like chess pieces in silence, the noose tightened around the millionaire. Even in his coma, Edward remained the center of every move, a king surrounded by enemies in his own fortress. What no one knew was who would strike first and who would survive the snake pit his family had become. Michael Collins no longer had doubts that Edward had been poisoned. The pieces were falling into place, altered medical tests, glasses switched at strategic moments, employees intimidated into silence. The detective gathered the evidence like someone setting up a chessboard, waiting for the perfect checkmate. Yet something was still missing, the true motive. Meanwhile, Olivia continued her discreet incursions into the hidden floor of the casino. It was there on a silent night that she finally found the vault open. Inside, there wasn't just money or illegal contracts, but something far more explosive. Recordings. Tapes and digital files with the voices of politicians, businessmen, and even judges, all implicated in schemes that could bring down not only Edward, but half the Las Vegas elite. With trembling hands, Olivia listened to fragments confirming blackmail, bribes, and even covered-up murders. Each recording was a time bomb, ready to destroy entire careers. She knew she was holding the key to dismantling not just Blake's empire, but an entire system of corruption. The weight of the discovery left her breathless yet stronger. While Olivia uncovered secrets, Edward, now awake from his coma, began moving in search of answers. Frail but still arrogant, he interrogated family members and allies, desperate to discover who had dared to betray him. His paranoia grew by the hour, and the mansion turned into a stage of accusations and veiled threats. The millionaire knew death was circling too close. Michael, in parallel, reached the limits of his investigation. He found proof that the poisoning had been planned with surgical precision. What remained was knowing who had given the order. The detective, now allied with Olivia, realized that the noose was tightening not only around Edward but also around those closest to him. It was a venomous web, and someone was about to be revealed. The tension peaked when Edward, gathered with family members and close staff, announced he knew who had betrayed him. His weak voice echoed through the room, a blend of fear and rage. He raised his hand, ready to point at the culprit. Eyes locked, breaths caught as if time itself had frozen in one eternal second. But before he could speak, the unexpected happened. A shadow crossed the room and Edward was attacked once more, this time violently. A muffled cry and the sight of his body tumbling from the wheelchair sent shockwaves of panic across the room. The millionaire once again was at death's door, and the traitor's identity remained hidden. Olivia, shaken, clutched the recordings to her chest, knowing her discovery was now even more valuable. What she had found in that vault had the power to reveal the enemy, but it also made her a greater target. Every second, she understood more clearly that the line between justice and vengeance was becoming dangerously thin. In that moment, the Blake mansion was no longer a home but a stage for revelations and violence. The confession Edward tried to make had been silenced, yet the game was far from over. On the contrary, the attack only proved that the truth was about to surface, and the price for it would be higher than anyone had ever imagined. The revelation finally came to light, and the name behind Edward's poisoning was not the one many had imagined. Catherine Blake, the elegant and cold wife, emerged as the true mastermind of the entire conspiracy. For years, she had played the role of the submissive spouse, hiding her ambition beneath carefully calculated smiles and luxurious dresses. Now the mask had fallen, and the serpent bared its fangs. Michael was the one who connected the final threads. By following banking trails, call records, and testimonies from intimidated staff, he uncovered the direct link between Catherine and shadowy investors. These were powerful men, intent on taking over Edward's casinos and hotels. To achieve this, they needed him eliminated, and Catherine had been the perfect piece to execute the plan. Olivia, upon learning the truth, felt a mix of shock and relief. On one hand, the mind behind the crime was not some distant enemy, but someone inside the Blake household itself. On the other, this revelation brought her one step closer to justice. The woman who had so often despised her was now revealed as the true poison at the heart of the family. The confrontation between Edward and Catherine was inevitable. Frail and paranoid, the millionaire faced his wife with eyes filled with fury and fear. For the first time, he was no longer the one controlling the game. Catherine, standing tall before him, held her ground without flinching. Her icy composure turned the moment into something almost theatrical. Olivia entered at the height of the tension. With the recordings in hand, she exposed not only Catherine's betrayal, but also the empire of corruption Edward had built over decades. Each word struck like a hammer blow, shattering the illusions of power that once made him seem untouchable. Edward, who had always mocked the weakness of others, now trembled. Confronted with the evidence, his wife's betrayal and Olivia's rising strength, His arrogance gave way to fear. For the first time, the man who once saw himself as an absolute king appeared small, cornered, and on the verge of losing everything. Catherine, by contrast, showed no remorse. Her ambition was so immense that even the risk of exposure seemed not to shake her. Yet the weight of the evidence, combined with the pressure from Michael and Olivia, made escape impossible. The queen had fallen into her own trap, crushed beneath the gravity of her greed. The clash inside the mansion felt like more than a mere family reckoning. It was the collapse of an empire, proof that no fortress of luxury could forever hide the rot of those who ruled it. There, in that brightly lit hall, Edward's power crumbled before the strength of two unlikely figures, his treacherous wife and the maid he once humiliated. The silence that followed the revelation was deafening. Edward, pale, stared at Olivia as though finally recognizing his defeat. Catherine, defiant, awaited the verdict of fate, and Michael, watching from the shadows, knew the battle was nearing its end. But the final act remained, the definitive fall of a king who no longer had a throne. The fall of the Blake Empire began with Catherine's arrest. The corridors of the mansion, once echoing with luxurious parties, were now filled with police officers and journalists. Her image as an elegant, untouchable woman collapsed in front of the cameras. Handcuffed, she walked with her back straight, still trying to maintain her composure, but the world already saw her as the traitor who sacrificed everything for power. Andrew, desperate, lacked the courage to face the storm. Surrounded by creditors and threatened by criminals, he fled the city like a coward. The young man who once boasted of living above the rules now crawled in the shadows, just another fugitive among many. His downfall was inevitable, the direct reflection of the wrong choices he had inherited and perpetuated. Samantha, on the other hand, made a surprising decision. With restrained tears, she offered to testify against her own mother. Her fragility transformed into courage, and alongside Olivia and Michael, she became a key figure in ensuring justice was served. For the first time, she freed herself from the invisible prison her father had built around her. Edward watched it all like a defeated spectator. His fortune evaporated, his allies abandoned him, and his reputation was destroyed in every headline. The king of casinos and hotels was now just an old, frail man, haunted by the ghosts of his past. His arrogance no longer echoed. All that remained was the silence of someone who had lost everything. Olivia, meanwhile, emerged as a symbol of resilience. The humiliated worker became the unexpected heroine, recognized by all as the woman who helped expose the rot of an empire. The hotel where she had once been spat on now saw her occupy a new place, the manager's office. Her posture as she addressed the staff radiated dignity and triumph. The public applauded her rise as if it were a collective redemption. Olivia no longer represented just herself, but all those who had been trampled and ignored by the arrogance of the powerful. Her journey, marked by pain and hard work, now transformed into inspiration. The maid had become a symbol of justice, proving that dignity can never be discarded. Meanwhile, Edward's decline into loneliness was the final portrait of his tragedy. In an empty mansion, surrounded only by cold walls and bitter memories, he turned on the TV to watch Olivia's speech. His eyes, once hard and merciless, now reflected only defeat. He muttered softly, as if speaking to himself, "This was my kingdom, and she took it all." The imaginary screen closes on this cruel contrast. On one side, Olivia's just and transformative victory. On the other, Edward's irreversible ruin. The king had fallen, and there was no room for revenge. The final end had arrived, with every piece of his empire crumbling under the weight of its own corruption. The audience by now didn't just watch, they felt the catharsis. The journey that began with humiliation ended in justice. The cycle closed, proving that even the most untouchable of kings can fall, and that even the most invisible of victims can rise as a symbol of change. Yet, in the silence that followed, lingered the sense that other stories of power and downfall were still waiting to be told. The journey that began with a public humiliation ended with the fall of an entire empire. Olivia, once seen only as a maid without a voice, rose as a symbol of justice, while Edward, the arrogant king of Las Vegas, withered away alone in his own ruin. Catherine was unmasked, Andrew fled like a coward, and Samantha finally broke free from her father's chains by testifying against her own mother. But is the story truly over? What if the recordings Olivia found still hold secrets yet to be revealed? And what if the dark alliances Catherine and Andrew forged resurface to threaten what little remains? The snake pit may be silent now, but serpents always know the right moment to strike again. Now I want to hear from you. Should there be a part 2 to this story? Would you like to see the next twist, new conspiracies, and what happens when defeated enemies try to rise again? Share your opinion in the comments. Your answer will decide if this tale continues. And don't forget, subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss a thing. Because if you thought this was the end, maybe you've only witnessed the beginning of something even greater.